fun. All right, guys, go to a fresh page. We're going to call it Unit 4, the Civil War era, 1844 to 1877. All right. Okay, so this era here, this is an area of the most polarized time in American history, obviously, right? We're going to go to a war with ourselves. It's hard to get more polarized than a war with ourselves. So this is the most polarized time in American history. And let's be absolutely clear while we're talking about this, everything is slavery. Every single issue in the United States, basically every single issue from 1844 to 1877 is slavery. Okay. I know that some people are going to like chime in and they're going to say stuff like, it's, the Civil War wasn't about slavery, it was about states' rights or about something like that. Those people are either lying to you or they don't know what they're talking about. Okay. Because every single issue is slavery. Okay. It is about states' rights. The states' rights to own slaves, right? It is about economics, the economics of slavery. It is about, right? It is about property ownership. Which property? Slaves. It is like, you see what's going on, right? Like every single issue, as soon as you scratch the surface, even just slightly, it's about slaves. It's about slavery. Okay. I can't think of a single issue from this time period that isn't about slavery. So let's get started. All right, so we're going to go back a little bit. Let's go ahead and make this part A. We're going to go back in time slightly. This is the trial of Reuben Crandall, and it's during Andrew Jackson's presidency. Go ahead and put it in this unit because I purposely did these out of order, right? Just so thematically they are linked together. Okay, so 1835 under Andrew Jackson. So Reuben Crandall, this gentleman right here with the glasses, Reuben Crandall is an abolitionist. Now he's a doctor. He's a medical doctor, a physician in Washington, D.C. And he comes from a family of abolitionists. His sister is also a pretty prominent abolitionist. But he starts to write pamphlets, abolitionist pamphlets, anti-slavery pamphlets, and he starts to publish them and distribute them around Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. is a slave area of the country. It's not a state, it's a slave district, right? Where slavery is legal in Washington, D.C. And Crandall is making an argument that that the nation's capital should not have slavery, that the majority of states don't want slavery, that the nation's capital of a country that is built on freedom shouldn't be, holding people in chains, basically, which, I think was a pretty fair argument, pretty good argument. So the white population of Washington, D.C. goes through the roof. This is going to be the start of a long tradition of white riots breaking out over this issue. Okay, white riots they're not going to go away. They're going to be with us for quite a while. Okay, so the first big white riot that we're going to get is Snow Riot. That's an unintentional pun. I didn't intend to be White Riot, be Snow Riot. But anyway, damn, I should have planned that out better. I could have made that really funny. Oh well. Okay, so we call it the Snow Riot because the white pro-slavery people, they start looking for, they start getting their weapons out and stuff, and they start looking for Crandall. They can't find Crandall. So instead, they just turn on Beverly Snow. Beverly Snow is a man. He's a black man. He's a black business owner in Washington, D.C. We do not have a picture of Beverly Snow. But they turn on Beverly Snow. They burn his building down. They start to basically just rage through the black neighborhoods of Washington, D.C. And they start attacking a bunch of people there. Now, this riot is so controversial, right? It's so big, and it's right in the nation's capital that the Army gets called in, the Marine Corps gets called in to stop it, and then the Marine Corps arrests Dr. Crandall. They arrest Crandall and they throw him in jail, and he is arrested for sedition. Now, do any of you guys remember what sedition is? We saw it before. What is sedition? We saw it with John Adams. John Adams was kind of abusing the sedition laws. You guys remember what sedition is?
I remember learning about it, but I forgot what it is.
Well, come on now. Go look in your notes. Let's figure it out. Come on, smarty pants. Anika's just staring into the camera, waiting for. She's like, Eric will get it eventually. Eric will save us.
Eric knows everything. Eric should know this.
No, that's not how this works.
Look back in John Adams.
It's always John Adams that we look back to.
Adams is a pretty important dude. So under the Sedition Act, Alien and Sedition Act.
It's like,
Shiva?
is it the bad? Just call me Shiva. It's the no bad mouthing the government. That's what I have in my notes.
Bad mouthing the government, that's fine. Yeah. So sedition is speaking out against the government, specifically speaking out about overthrowing the government. So they arrest him and they charge him with sedition. They charge Crandall with sedition, and they charge him with sedition by saying that Washington, D.C. is a slave government and he's speaking out against slavery, therefore he's speaking out against the government. You guys like that argument? How's that argument sound? It sounds like a big bag of poop is what it sounds like. It's a terrible argument, which is why the courts find him innocent and they throw that argument out. The courts are like, no, your argument is a bag of poop. They don't, that's not the technical term. That's my term. He's found to be innocent. Unfortunately for him, he was in jail for 9 months and he wasn't allowed to get out on bail because they set his bail so high that nobody could pay it. And so they made him just sit in jail for 9 months. And he contracted tuberculosis while he was in there. The other prisoners had tuberculosis. And so he dies. Why are we talking about this doctor, right? We're talking about this because this is going to be a precursor. This gets put into newspapers across the entire country that abolitionists are starting to say, this is what's going to happen to us. Violence is going to be used against us. This is a precursor for what's happening. Right? This is our first really, really good, solid example of an abolitionist being attacked by a mob. It is not our last example. Okay, B, big number B, let's attack another abolitionist. The murder of Elijah Parrish Lovejoy. All right, here's Lovejoy right here with the good hair. Look at that. All right, here's Lovejoy with the nice hair. All right, so Elijah Parrish Lovejoy, number B, he's from St. Louis, Missouri. He's in St. Louis, Missouri, and he's an abolitionist. He runs a newspaper, an abolitionist newspaper in St. Louis, Missouri. Now, Missouri is a slave state. Okay. He is publishing these newspapers, he's publishing articles and stuff. He's actually getting himself pretty famous in the abolitionist circles. Like abolitionists up in New England are listening to him, in New York, in Pennsylvania, right? They're listening to this guy, especially since he's in a slave state, right? So being in a slave state and being an abolitionist is, pretty daring. It's pretty daring, as we're gonna find out. We're gonna get the lynching of Francis McIntosh. Francis McIntosh, we don't have a picture of him, but this is him in the picture in this drawing right here. Francis McIntosh is a half black, half white ship captain. Say boat captain, because it's not on the ocean. It's on the Mississippi River. So he's a boat captain, like a riverboat captain. A riverboat, I don't think he's the captain. I think he's the pilot. Riverboat pilot, Francis McIntosh. He's half black, half white. He's free. Francis McIntosh gets attacked by a group of white people. Some of the white people are trying to, they're trying to like basically capture him for slavery and stuff, essentially. right? Even though he's born free. They're trying to treat him like a fugitive slave. He pulls out a knife and defends himself. McIntosh stabs 2 white people who are attacking him. One of them he kills, and the other one he severely injures. McIntosh then becomes the victim of a lynching. The victim of a lynching. Let's define the term lynching. So your next line down, let's define the term lynching. This is a term that's not going to go away. It's going to be with us for a while. All right, so the lynching is a racially motivated murder. A racially motivated murder done by a group of people. Actually, say mob. It's a mob usually. Done by a mob of people. It's a racially motivated murder done by a mob of people that is intended to be a message to the community. It's intended to be a message to the community. In the United States, lynchings are usually against a black man. The victim is usually a black man. And most common in the United States is to hang him in a tree. Okay. Lynchings are not going to go away. Lynchings are going to become a massive. Lynchings have been with the United States since early colonial times, and lynchings are not going to go away. They're going to continue in the United States for quite a while. We're going to spend some time with lynching after the Civil War. We're going to read some Ida B. Wells, and we're going to address lynching. It's going to become a bigger problem after the Civil War, but we need to be clear that it's happening at this time too. Okay. Lynchings are still happening today. We still have had, I think there was 8 lynchings associated with the Black Lives Matter movement this summer. 8 lynchings, I think. But in the modern day, a lot of lynchings in the modern day are against transgender people. A lot of transgender people being lynched. But for quite a while, it's going to be African Americans. I want you to be clear here. Sometimes the lynching victims are Black women. Sometimes they're not African Americans. They're going to get a lot of like Chinese lynching in California and stuff, like, and they're not always hanging people in trees. They're sometimes, like in the case of McIntosh, they're tying him to a post and lighting him on fire, right? Or they're torturing him for a while. There's unfortunately, right? What really matters here is that the lynching is from a mob. Oh, there's the last part of that's add this to the victory, to the definition. Add this to the definition. The mob in the lynching usually claim that they are exacting justice of some kind. So the mob usually claims that they're exacting justice. This claim is, of course, a big bag of poop, right? There's no justice here. It's not. This is where the term mob justice comes from. If you've heard that term before, mob justice, right? Or mob rule. There's no justice here, right? In order for it to be justice, it needs to be a publicly known law. It needs to be a publicly accountable enforcement. It needs to have like a court system where you can prove guilt or innocence. You need to have, you know, punishments that are exacted out in an objective way that aren't targeting one group of people specifically, right? Like justice is a lot different than this, right? Justice requires a bunch of different steps. This is not, this is murder. It's a particular brand of murder. Anyway, Francis McIntosh is lynched. He's killed. He is tortured and lit on fire and murdered. At this point, the crowd starts to turn on Lovejoy. Lovejoy leaves St. Louis. He's driven out of St. Louis. He leaves St. Louis. He sets up shop in Alton, Illinois, which is a town nearby, and he starts to establish a new abolitionist newspaper again. But he is murdered. He's murdered very shortly after the mob finds him and shoots him and kills him. This is going to send ripples through the abolitionist community around the country, because now they're saying, now we have an abolitionist being murdered. This is going to activate this man right here, John Brown. Have you guys heard of John Brown before? All right. John Brown, Josh, go ahead and read his quote for us.
Here before God, in the presence of these witnesses, from this time, I consecrate my life to the destruction of slavery.
John Brown's a preacher from Indiana, and he's going to dedicate his life to fighting slavery. John Brown, from this point forward, is going to become a very, very loud and aggressive voice in favor of abolition, in favor of destroying slavery. John Brown eventually is going to actually lead an armed rebellion against the slave owners and try to arm slaves to kill their masters and stuff. That's what's going to happen, but we're not there yet. We're not there yet, but that is where John Brown's going. We're setting the stage for this to come later. Okay, let's get another one here. 1838, Pennsylvania Hall. This is in Philadelphia. In Philadelphia, they built this giant building called Pennsylvania Hall. There's a big, giant building. The building was supposed to be a huge meeting house dedicated to abolitionism. It's a huge meeting house dedicated to abolition. And Pennsylvania has a pretty good record on slavery so far, right? Even back in colonial times, Pennsylvania was against slavery way back in the day. What group is active in Pennsylvania and that is the most consistently anti-slavery group that we have? What group is it? Oh no, you're killing me here. A religious group, a particular group of Christians.
Quakers?
Who?
The Quakers?
There you go. There you go. So the Quakers are the primary donors for the building, but the building is not a religious building, it's a political building. Okay. This building is supposed to be dedicated to racial equality and also actually the equality of all persons. So actually women's rights groups are going to start meeting in here too. Women's rights groups are going to meet in here. Racial right, black rights groups are going to meet in here. Abolitionist groups are going to meet in here. They don't meet for long because 4 days after it's constructed, it gets burned down. An angry white mob attacks the building and they burn the building down. Philadelphia is going to also be home to some more violence. 42, just a couple of years later, they're going to get the Lombard Street riot, which is going to be a riot of Irish immigrants against blacks, because the Irish immigrants are claiming that the free blacks are taking all the jobs. That's what the Lombard Street riot is. That they're going to claim that the free blacks are taking all the jobs, and so the Irish are going to burn down a bunch of black houses and attack a bunch of black people. A couple of years after that, we're going to get a nativist riot, and that's where all the native-born Philadelphians accuse the Irish of taking all their jobs. And so this is an anti-Irish riot. The nativist riot also is attacking Irish people, but also it kind of scoops up black people into the same riot as well. This is where you're going to get a lot of times white conservative people today who are making an argument that race isn't as big of an issue as liberals seem to think it is. They're going to make an argument and they'll say, well, the Irish were victims of violence back in the day. Well, they were. This is an example where the Irish were a victim of violence. They were. But even in an anti-Irish riot, it was still black people who get killed, right? Like it's still, it's just because the Irish are being targeted sometimes doesn't mean that they're equal, right? Does that make sense? Philadelphia is going to continue having some of this riot. Part of the problem is that Philadelphia sits on the Mason-Dixon line. You need to define Mason-Dixon line. Mason, M-A-S-O-N, dash Dixon, D-I-X-O-N. The Mason-Dixon line. The Mason-Dixon line is the south border of Pennsylvania, north border of Maryland. It's the slave-free border. I think I have a map on here somewhere. Here, if you look on this map right here, it's this line right here. The Mason-Dixon line, where they say everything south of the Mason-Dixon line is slave, everything north of the Mason-Dixon line is free. Okay. Mason and Dixon were the two guys who surveyed the line. All right. Do we have questions about Pennsylvania Hall? Again, this is a further thing riling abolitionists up, saying that we're going to have to fight. Okay, let's get some literature here. So what was this? A, B, C, D. So big number D. D will be literature. We have two examples of literature I want to use. Because I think that they're both kind of tapping into the same thing, but they're not, they're tapping into the same thing, but they're not the same kind of literature. Okay. So the first one is called American Slavery as It Is. This is a nonfiction book written by these three authors, Theodore Dwight Weld, and Angelina Grimke and Sarah Grimke. If you guys did your homework last week, the Grimke sisters were part of the homework, right? A lot of you guys, a lot of students did the Grimke sisters. Weld is married to Angelina Grimke, and then Sarah is Angelina's sister. Okay. They are abolitionists. Their book is a pretty interesting book. What they did is they collected newspaper clippings from Southern newspapers, from all the newspapers they could find. They went back as far as they could find, all the newspapers they could find, and they collected all the newspapers, and then they went through like the classified ads in the newspaper where people were like advertising for like runaway slaves, saying this slave ran away, he looks like this is his name, blah, 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 help me get him, right? They took all of those classified ads, and then they took articles, any articles they could find about anti-slave violence or anything like that, and they compiled them all into this book called 1,000 Witnesses, the Testimony of 1,000 Witnesses. And this book is basically a collection trying to challenge the idea that slaves liked to be slaves, right? It was a very common idea at this time period amongst white people that slaves liked it, that they liked to be the slave, that they wanted to be the slaves, that they were better off. Like people would oftentimes say stuff like, they're better off living in America than living in Africa because now they get to be American and they get to, be Christian and they get to speak English and they get to do all these other things, right? And America is so great, right? Where if we left them in Africa, then they just have diseases and they'd probably get eaten by a lion or something, right? There's this racist idea that slaves want to be slaves. And this book is basically saying, well, if the slaves want to be slaves, then how come like 10,000 of them ran away, right? How come all this violence? How come all this other stuff is going on? Okay, spoiler alert, slaves don't want to be slaves. Yeah, that may shock you. That may be a really shocking statement, but slaves don't want to be slaves. All right, the other book goes on the other side. It's called Uncle Tom's Cabin. It's by Harriet Beecher Stowe. Uncle Tom's Cabin is a fictional story. It's a fictional story about a slave population that lives on a plantation. And it's trying to tell more like an emotional truth about slavery, right? Where this American Slavery as It Is a very like rational, approach, rational, like almost scientific approach. Uncle Tom's Cabin is more speaking about like an emotional truth. Okay. This book portrays the slaves as like actual people that have like feelings and thoughts and dreams and hopes, and that they have like emotional depth to them, that they have like characterization to them, right? What she's trying to do is kind of rehumanize the slaves, right? Trying to get white people in the North to recognize that the slaves are in fact people and rehumanize them. By today's standards, this book doesn't hold up very well. It's still pretty racist by today's standards, but for the time for 1852, it is like a radically progressive book, right? It is a book. There is no one in the world writing a book about the humanity of slaves, right? And here she is writing this book. This book becomes immensely popular. It becomes the highest, it becomes the second highest selling book of the entire century. It gets printed in like 90 languages around the world. It becomes a massively popular book, second only to what? Oh, come on now. You should know this. Second only to the Bible.
Oh.
Oh,
Come on now. You should have known that, right? All right. So, but Uncle Tom's Cabin becomes printed second only to the Bible. It becomes a massively, massively popular book, right? Much more popular than this like dry, rational explanation book, right? People aren't going to sit around and read this, but this becomes a book that like kids can read and families can read. Okay. All right. Let's go to E, big number E. Is that right? We're going to do two presidents for the price of one, Harrison and Tyler. So William Henry Harrison is the president who does not deserve anything more than just writing his name because he dies in 30 days. He dies in 30 days. He's president for like 1 month. Yeah. Yep. He's president for 1 month. He gives the longest speech of any president, contracts pneumonia, spends his 30 days in bed suffering from pneumonia, and then he dies because of his pneumonia. That's the only thing he's known for. It's the only thing he's known for. Sorry, Harrison. I gave him a D- out of charity because it felt really mean to give him an F. But yeah, there you go. He didn't do anything at all. So Tyler becomes the president. This is the first time that we've had a president die. So Tyler's the first vice president to rise up. It causes a constitutional crisis when he becomes president. A constitutional crisis because they don't know what to do with a dead president, right? The Constitution is pretty vague. The Constitution just says that the vice president becomes the president when the president dies. And so a lot of people were like debating about this, and they're debating, oh, is he like a temporary president? Is he just president until we can hold a new election? Do we hold an election now? Does his 4-year term start now? Like, what do we do? Right? Tyler basically just like skips the debate by just grabbing one of the Supreme Court justices, and he's like, hey, while they're all arguing about this, why don't you just swear me in real quick? And the justice is like, yeah, okay, and swears him in. And then Tyler's like, I've been sworn in, I'm president. And then he just like walks away. And then the whole room kind of just shrugs, and they're like, okay, I guess. Like, and there we go. Vice presidents are born, right? And the whole country just kind of shrugs, and they're like, okay, that seems good, I guess. Sure. Right? And then they all just kind of agree that he's going to just finish off the term and we'll have a regularly scheduled election. So this is how vice presidents work. He didn't really do much. But he also didn't harm the country too badly. So that's why he gets a D+. You're going to see a real theme going on here from president number like 9 all the way through 16. They're all bad. They're all bad. None of them are good. They're all bad. Tyler's not responsible for this, but let's put this in here. Congress casts a gag rule. They pass a gag rule. It's not Tyler's fault, but it happens under his presidency. Congress passes a gag rule. A gag rule means that you are forbidden from talking about a certain topic. So this means Congress is forbidden from addressing an issue. What issue are they going to be forbidden from doing? Slavery. The answer is always slavery, right? So they pass a rule making it illegal for Congress to abolish slavery. Wah, wah. Yeah. Oh. All right. So you may have noticed their political party of these two guys. These guys are Whigs, right? So you should be asking yourself, what's a Whig? Well, that's a good question. There you go. Keep this in the same number. What's a Whig? The Whig is basically just the anti-Jackson party. They don't really stand for anything. They mostly just stand for we don't like Jackson. That's basically all they stand for. If you're looking at like their big groups, they have all these big groups within their parties. Some of them are abolitionists, Southerners who are fighting for states' rights. Some of them are evangelical Christians. Some of them are business owners. They don't really stand for anything. Not really. They're kind of liberal just because the Democrats under Jackson are pretty conservative. Kind of liberal, but they're not all that liberal, right? Their leader is Henry Clay, who we've seen him before, right? Their leader is Henry Clay, who basically has dedicated his entire political life to being anti-Jackson, basically. I told you Jackson's really important. He casts a big shadow over the time. The entire political party is basically anti-Jackson. That's basically all it is. Clay runs for president not once, not twice, not 3 times, but 6 times. And he loses. Yeah, Clay loses 6 times. He is our big presidential loser. He loses 6 times, but you know, the Whigs eventually collapse. Abraham Lincoln is going to be our first Republican, right? And the Whig party basically just collapses around him while he's a Whig, right? And then he looks to the side. He's like, I guess I'm like a Republican now. Yeah, that's it. We'll go with Republican. And then the whole country's like, okay, that sounds like a good name for a party. And they're like, we're with Lincoln. Like, I'm with Abe. And then they all basically just join Abraham Lincoln, right? But for now, the Whigs are just anti-Jackson. That's basically all they are. Okay. I think that's going to be stopped. We're going to stop there. That's quite a bit of stuff. You guys do have an assignment. The assignment, let me pull up Canvas here. All right. So your assignment is, oh, what am I doing here? Why is this in my way? Okay. So you have the 2 assignments for the week. The first is the discussion, the Frederick Douglass discussion. You guys, I hope you know who Frederick Douglass is already. You guys give me a thumbs up if you already know. Oh no. Okay. Oh God. Okay. Yeah. Frederick Douglass, the African-American guy, he used to be a slave, became free, and became like the loudest, clearest voice for abolitionism, basically in all of American history. That guy? Yeah. So we're going to read a couple of his, 2 of his speeches, Constitution and Slavery, and then probably his greatest speech, What to the Slave is the 4th of July. And you'll do those readings on your own. The other assignment, which will be due next week, is states admitted before the Civil War. So let's look at this one real quick. This one is, again, in class, the groups are working on it, but you know, you guys are your own kinds of people. So what we need to do here is, I'm telling you everything is about slavery. Well, everything's about slavery, right? One of the things that is most about slavery is the order of states joining the Union, okay? That you're gonna look at these states as America expands to the West Coast, we start admitting all these states, and you're gonna see we're starting to admit them as like pairs, right? Because they're constantly fighting over who gets to control the Senate, constantly, right? Because the Senate is always two representatives for each state. And so the slave states are freaked out that the Northerners are going to get rid of slavery. The Northerners are freaked out that the Southerners are going to expand slavery. And they both are just like locked, like two deer that have gotten their horns locked in together, something like that, right? So as you go through these states, you are going to kind of fill all these things out for the states, okay? What you're going to do basically is, the test is never going to ask you, they're like, riddle me this, student. What is the 23rd state, right? And you're going to have to be like, 23rd is Maine. Like, no one's going to do that. Nobody cares about that, right? What they care about is the political controversy that was surrounding the time when the state gets admitted, okay? That's what we care about. And there's all of these different Mexican-American War and slavery and Canada and France and all these different issues that are going on. All of these issues are on the test. They're all guaranteed to be on the test. So by learning about the issues that are affecting the different states, then you are taking the issue and you're like redoing it multiple times and it reinforces it for you. Does that make sense? Are you guys with me on that?
Yep.
All right, one of the things that's a little bit controversial, well, not controversial, confusing, that's the better word. One of the things that's a little bit confusing to some of the students in class today is what these three boxes are. This is the status of the land upon admission, 10 to 30 years prior and 30 years prior. What we're trying to do is we're trying to see what happened to, like, who controlled the state, like the Spanish controlled it and then the Mexicans controlled it and then the Americans took it, right? Or was it native land and then French and then American? Or was it French and then English and then American, or what, right? What we're trying to do is see what cultures are leaving imprints upon the state. Okay, what cultural imprints we have on the states, right? In a AP geography sense of the word, we are examining the cultural landscape of the state. Yeah, in your AP geography, right? So, so you'd have a state like, let's say, Mississippi, right? On admission, you would ask yourself, how did the United States get this land of Mississippi? Well, we got it because it was basically just empty. America just took it, right? In the case of Mississippi, we just took the land, right? 20 to 30, 10 to 30 years. In the case of Mississippi, it's just natives, right? And 30 years prior is natives again, right? So Mississippi's pretty easy. But if we go to, like, say, Florida, right? How did we get it? We purchased it from Spain. Who controlled it before? Spain. Who controlled it before? Spain, right? Texas is a trickier one, right? On here, it's going to be the Texas Republic. Prior to that, it's Mexico. Prior to that, it's Spain. See what I'm saying? Right? So you're going to basically just do that for all of them. Okay? It'll be due next Tuesday before we leave for Thanksgiving break. Cool?
Cool.
Again, I won't have class next week. We will do class this Thursday, though. Okay? Like, Thursday will be like a normal day. Cool?
Okay.
Do we have any problems, questions, comments? All right.